Captain Lee Tae-ho stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Force cruiser Indomitable, watching the stars through the main viewing screen. The ship was patrol duty near the outer colonies, keeping watch for pirates and smugglers. It was supposed to be a quiet assignment. Lee Tae-ho preferred it that way. After 15 years in the Space Navy, he had seen enough action to last a lifetime. The communications officer, Lieutenant Park Jin-soo, looked up from his station. "Captain, we're getting strange readings from the New Seoul station. Their signals just cut out completely." Lee Tae-ho frowned. New Seoul Station was humanity's most advanced research facility, floating in orbit around the gas giant Hanyang. His sister, Dr. Lee Mi-ran, worked there as head of the xenobiology department. She studied alien life forms that exploration ships brought back from distant worlds. "Try to contact them again," Lee Tae-ho ordered. "Maybe it's just a communication error." Park Jin-soo worked at his console for several minutes. His face grew more worried with each passing second. "Captain, I can't reach them at all. It's like the entire station just disappeared." Before Lee Tae-ho could respond, the ship's alarm system started screaming. Red lights flashed across the bridge. The tactical officer, Ensign Kim Yoo-jin, shouted over the noise. "Captain, multiple unknown ships dropping out of hyperspace. They're huge!" The main screen changed to show space around the Indomitable. Lee Tae-ho's blood went cold. Massive alien ships materialized out of nowhere, each one the size of a small moon. They were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The hulls were dark and seemed to absorb light. Strange symbols glowed along their sides. "How many?" Lee Tae-ho asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 12 ships, sir." "No, wait. More are appearing. 20, 30. I've lost count." The largest ship moved toward them. It was so big that it blocked out the stars behind it. A beam of green energy shot from its front. The beam hit a nearby asteroid and the rock simply vanished, turned to dust in an instant. "All hands to battle stations," Lee Tae-ho ordered. "Send a priority message to Earth Command. Tell them we're under attack by unknown forces." The ship's weapons officer, Commander Oh Si-jin, looked up from her station. "Captain, they're not responding to any communication attempts." "And sir, our sensors can't get a clear reading on their ships. It's like they're not fully there." Another green beam lanced out from the alien fleet. This time it hit the Indomitable directly. The ship's shields flared and died instantly. Emergency lights flickered on as the main power failed. "Shields down. Hull breach on deck 7 through 10, engineering reported. "We've lost 30% of our power." Lee Tae-ho gripped his command chair as the ship shook from another hit. "Return fire. All weapons." The Indomitable's plasma cannons and missile tubes opened up on the nearest alien ship. The weapons struck the dark hull and simply passed through it, as if the ship wasn't really there. "The alien vessel didn't even slow down. Our weapons aren't working," Oh Si-jin reported. "They're passing right through their hulls." More reports flooded in from across human space. The communication channels filled with desperate messages from colony worlds and outposts. The mining world of Daegu was under attack. The research stations around Busan Colony had gone silent. Every human settlement in the Outer Rim was being hit at the same time. On Earth, Commander Park Jin-woo sat in the war room deep beneath the capital city. Maps and screens showed the locations of every human world and ship. One by one, the green dots representing colonies and stations turned red, then went dark completely. "Sir, we're getting reports from everywhere," his aide reported. "It's a coordinated attack." They hit every major human settlement at exactly the same time. Park Jin-woo had been a military strategist for 20 years. He had planned defenses against pirates, rebels, and even hostile alien contact. But this was beyond anything he had imagined. The attackers had better technology, more ships, and they seemed to know exactly where every human was located. "What about our fleet?" he asked. The Third Fleet engaged the enemy near Incheon Colony. They reported that their weapons can't hit the alien ships. The enemy weapons cut through our shields like they aren't there. Dr. Choi Hyejin was in her laboratory on Earth when the attacks began. As humanity's leading expert on alien life, she was called to the war room immediately. She studied the few images and sensor readings that ships had managed to send before being destroyed. The aliens were tall and reptilian, with 4 arms and large black eyes. Their ships used technology that seemed impossible. They could become solid to attack, then phase out of reality to avoid return fire. It was like fighting ghosts. "They're clearly more advanced than us," Dr. Choi told the military leaders. "But why are they attacking? We've never even met them before." The answer came when one of the alien ships sent a message to Earth. The voice was cold and mechanical, translated by computer into human language. Humans of Earth, you are designated as a pest species. Your rapid expansion and chaotic nature threaten the order of the galaxy. You will be eliminated for the greater good of all civilized worlds. Resistance is pointless. Surrender and your deaths will be quick. President Kim Do-hyun listened to the message in the secure bunker beneath the presidential palace. Around him, military and scientific advisors argued about response options. But the president's mind was already made up. Activate Project Prometheus, he said quietly. Sir, that project isn't ready, one of the advisors protested. Dr. Lee Mi-ran was still working on it when New Seoul Station was destroyed. Then we'll finish her work, the president replied. If these aliens think humans will just give up and die, they don't understand us at all. Back on the Indomitable, Captain Lee Tae-ho watched his ship die around him. Half his crew was dead. The ship's hull was breaking apart. But he refused to abandon his post. Captain, we have to evacuate, Park Jin-soo shouted over the sounds of the ship tearing itself apart. Lee Tae-ho looked at the alien ships surrounding them. They hung in space like dark angels of death, picking apart the remains of his vessel with surgical precision. His sister was dead. His ship was dying. Most of humanity's colonies were already gone, but humans didn't give up. They never gave up. Send one final message, he ordered. Broadcast it on all frequencies so the aliens can hear it too. What should I say, sir? Lee Tae-ho thought of his sister. Of all the people on the colonies who had died without warning, he thought of Earth, still fighting somewhere behind enemy lines. His voice was steady and calm when he spoke. Tell them, you'll pay for starting this war. The aliens intercepted the message as intended. In their command ships, they listened to the humans' words and made sounds that might have been laughter. The humans were defeated, their fleets destroyed, their colonies burning. Yet this one still spoke of making them pay. It amused them. These chaotic creatures understood nothing of real power. They had no idea that Lee Tae-ho's message wasn't a threat. It was a promise. 6 months had passed since the aliens first attacked. The creatures called themselves the Vorthak, and they had turned most of human space into a graveyard. 80% of the colonies were gone. The great cities that humans had built, among the stars, were now nothing but floating debris and radiation. But humans were harder to kill than the Vorthak had expected. Colonel Yoon Jae-sung crouched in the ruined corridors of what used to be Mining Station Delta 7. The station had been gutted by Vorthak weapons, but its inner core was still intact. That's where he and 50 other survivors had made their home. Any word from the Seoul Group? He asked Lieutenant Choi Min-ho, who was monitoring their hidden communication array. They hit a Vorthak supply convoy yesterday, Choi reported. Destroyed 3 ships and escaped before reinforcements arrived. But they lost 6 people doing it. Yoon nodded grimly. Every victory cost them. But they kept fighting anyway. All across the ruins of human space, small groups of survivors hid in asteroid bases, abandoned mines, and the wreckage of their former homes. They called themselves the Underground. Deep in the hidden base built inside asteroid NK-47, engineer Kim So-young worked on humanity's most important project. She had been studying pieces of destroyed Vorthak ships for months, trying to understand how their technology worked. The aliens' phase-shifting ability was the key to everything. Their ships could become like ghosts, letting human weapons pass right through them. But Kim had found something interesting in the wreckage. For a split second during the phase shift, the alien ships became solid again. That tiny moment was when they were vulnerable. Show me the power readings again, she said to her assistant, Dr. Lim Hai-wan. The data appeared on their improvised screen. Kim studied the energy patterns carefully. The Vorthak technology used quantum manipulation to shift between dimensions. It was incredibly advanced, but it had rules. Everything had rules there. She pointed to a spike in the readings. Every 47 seconds, they have to become solid to recharge their quantum generators. If we can time our attacks perfectly, we might actually be able to hurt them, Lim finished. In another part of the galaxy, Dr. Choi Hye-jin worked in a laboratory hidden in the ruins of Busan Colony. She wasn't studying Vorthak technology. She was studying the Vorthak themselves. 3 months ago, the Resistance had managed to capture a wounded alien during a raid. The creature was still alive, though it refused to speak to its captors. Dr. Choi had learned a lot just by watching it. The Vorthak were part of something bigger than just one species. They belonged to a confederation of alien races that had existed for thousands of years. This confederation kept peace in the galaxy by destroying any species that seemed too chaotic or unpredictable. Humans weren't their first victims. According to the data they had captured from Vorthak computers, the Confederation had eliminated dozens of species over the millennia. They always followed the same pattern: sudden attack, overwhelming force, complete extermination. But something was different this time. The other species had fought honorably, following the accepted rules of galactic warfare. They had challenged the Vorthak to fair battles and lost quickly when their technology proved inferior. Humans didn't fight fair. Captain Baek Soo-jin proved that every day. She commanded a small fleet of human ships that had survived the initial attacks, but she didn't use them for traditional space battles. Instead, she turned them into weapons of terror. Her latest target was a Vorthak medical ship, clearly marked with symbols indicating it was non-military. According to galactic law, such ships were protected and couldn't be attacked. Beck didn't care about galactic law. The Vorthak had started this war by destroying human civilian targets. New Sol Station had been a research facility with families and children aboard. The aliens had shown no mercy to human non-combatants, so Beck would show no mercy to theirs. "Remember, we hit fast and hard," she told her pilots over the communication channel. "Don't give them time to phase out. Use the quantum disruptors that Kim So-young designed." The attack lasted only minutes. Beck's ships dropped out of hyperspace right next to the medical vessel. Before the Vorthak could react, human weapons tore through their hull. The aliens tried to phase out, but the quantum disruptors prevented it. The ship exploded in a ball of green fire. The surviving aliens in the area were shocked. No species had ever attacked a medical ship before. It went against every rule of civilized warfare. But as Baek's ships disappeared back into hyperspace, she sent them a message. "You want to play by rules? Then you shouldn't have started by breaking them." The Vorthak commanders didn't understand. They had followed their standard procedure for eliminating chaotic species. They had given the humans a chance to surrender before beginning the systematic destruction of their worlds. This was more mercy than most pest species received, but humans seemed to think that mercy meant weakness. They fought back with tactics that no civilized species would use. They hid among debris like scavengers. They attacked supply lines and support ships. They refused to meet the Vorthak in honest battle. It was disturbing. On Earth, the situation was different. The planet still stood, protected by a massive energy shield generated by the last working orbital defense platforms. President Kim Do-hyun had managed to keep the homeworld safe, but he knew it wouldn't last forever. The Vorthak were building something in space near Earth's moon. Spy drones had captured images of a massive construction project. It looked like a giant weapon, big enough to crack a planet in half. The aliens were taking their time, building it carefully and thoroughly. "How long do we have?" the president asked his scientific advisor. "Based on the construction rate, maybe 6 months," came the reply. "When that thing is finished, our shields won't matter." In the deep bunkers beneath Earth's surface, teams of scientists worked around the clock on Project Prometheus. They were finishing the work that Dr. Lee Mi-ran had started before her death. But it wasn't a weapon in any traditional sense. Commander Park Jin-woo studied the project files with growing amazement. Dr. Lee hadn't been working on guns or bombs. She had been creating something much more powerful, a complete database of human culture, history, and psychology. "I don't understand," he said to the project coordinator. "How is this supposed to help us fight?" "The aliens think they know what humans are," the coordinator explained. "They've studied our expansion patterns and our technology, but they don't understand what makes us human. Dr. Lee believed that if we could show them who we really are, we might find a way to turn their own nature against them." Park finished. In the hidden resistance bases, Colonel Yoon received a coded transmission from Earth. President Kim had a plan, but it required something that seemed impossible. The resistance would need to capture a Vorthak dreadnought intact, complete with its quantum communication array. Yoon shared the message with his fellow resistance leaders during their next secret meeting. They gathered in the ruins of what used to be a shopping mall on the colony world of Gwangju. "It's suicide," Captain Baek said flatly. "Those dreadnoughts are the size of cities. They have thousands of crew members and enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The president believes it's our only chance," Yoon replied. According to Earth's intelligence, every Vorthak ship is connected through their quantum communication network. If we could access that network, we could reach every alien in their fleet at once, Dr. Choi added. She had been studying Vorthak psychology for months. Their society is based on strict hierarchy. They follow orders without question. But what if we could plant doubt in their minds? Engineer Kim So-young looked up from her latest device, a weapon that could disrupt Vorthak shielding. I've been analyzing their ship designs. The dreadnoughts have one weakness. Their command centers are heavily shielded, but they have to lower those shields to use their communication arrays. So we'd have maybe a few minutes to take control. Captain Beck mused. It's still suicide, but at least it's possible suicide. The resistance leaders looked at each other. They were tired, outnumbered, and outgunned. Most of their people were dead. Their homes were destroyed. They had every reason to give up, but they were human. Humans didn't give up. When do we start? Yoon asked. As they began planning humanity's most desperate gamble, none of them knew that Captain Lee Tae-ho was still alive. He had survived the destruction of his ship and spent the last 6 months as a prisoner aboard a Vorthak vessel. He had learned much about his captors during that time, and he was ready to make them pay for what they had done. The war was about to change in ways that neither side could imagine. Han Min-ho had been pretending to be a broken man for 3 months. The Vorthak had captured him during a raid on their supply depot, and like all human prisoners, he was put to work as slave labor aboard their ships. The aliens believed humans were useful as manual workers, since their small size let them reach places that Vorthak couldn't. What the aliens didn't know was that Han was a trained intelligence officer. Every day, as he cleaned floors and moved cargo, he memorized ship layouts, guard rotations, and communication protocols. He had already sent 12 detailed reports back to the Resistance using a hidden transmitter built into his work tools. Now he was aboard the most important ship in the Vorthak fleet, the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, flagship of Admiral Zekthar himself. The alien who had planned and led the destruction of humanity's colonies was just a few decks above Han's head. The intelligence officer worked in the ship's lower cargo bays, but he had found ways to access other areas. Vorthak security was designed to keep enemies out, not to watch slaves who had already been captured. During the ship's sleep cycle, Han could move through maintenance tunnels that connected different sections. That's how he discovered the most important piece of information yet. Admiral Zekthar was gathering the entire Vorthak fleet around Earth. They were preparing for the final assault that would crack the planet's shields and finish off humanity, once and for all. But more importantly, Han had found the ship's quantum communication center. It was heavily guarded, but he had watched the technicians operating it. The system connected to every Vorthak vessel in the galaxy instantly. If the Resistance could take control of it, they could reach the entire alien civilization at once. Han sent his report during the next maintenance period. Within hours, it reached Colonel Yoon's base hidden in the asteroid belt. "This is it," Yoon told his senior officers. "Han found us our target. The Eternal Dominion will be at the center of their formation around Earth. If we can capture it, we get their fleet commander and their main communication array," Captain Beck finished. "But how do we get close enough?" "That ship will be surrounded by hundreds of escorts." Engineer Kim So-young had been working on new weapons for weeks. Her latest creation was a neural virus designed specifically for Vorthak computer systems. It wouldn't destroy their technology, but it would make their ships confused and sluggish. "I can give you maybe 10 minutes of chaos," she said. "The virus will spread through their network and make their defensive systems unreliable. But you'll have to get the boarding ships right next to the dreadnought before I activate it." Dr. Choi Hee-jin had been studying the captured Vorthak prisoner for months. She had finally gotten the alien to talk, though it refused to give military information. Instead, it told her about Vorthak society and how their rigid hierarchy worked. "Their entire culture is based on following orders," she explained to the planning meeting. "Lower-ranked Vorthak literally cannot disobey a higher-ranked one. It's bred into them over thousands of years. If we can convince them that their own leaders are giving different orders, we can turn their chain of command against itself," Yoon realized. The plan that emerged was audacious beyond belief. Colonel Yoon would lead the main resistance fleet in a direct assault on the Vorthak formation around Earth. It would look like a desperate final attack by the last human survivors. While the aliens focused on destroying this obvious threat, Captain Back would take a small team aboard a disguised cargo ship and infiltrate the Eternal Dominion. Beck's boarding team included some of the Resistance's best fighters. Park Chan-woo was an explosives expert who could disable alien systems with improvised bombs. Oh-Nari was a computer specialist who could hack Vorthak networks if they could reach the right terminals. The rest were volunteers who knew this was likely a one-way mission. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy the ship," Beck told them as they prepared. "We need to take the bridge intact and capture Admiral Zekthar alive. The communication array won't work without his command codes." The disguised cargo ship Hidden Blade looked like a piece of space junk from the outside. Kim So-young had designed special hull plating that would fool Vorthak sensors. To their instruments, it would appear to be debris from one of their own battles. As the ship drifted toward the alien fleet, Beck watched the tactical display with growing amazement. There were over 3,000 Vorthak vessels around Earth. Dreadnoughts, cruisers, destroyers, and support ships stretched in all directions. It was the largest military formation in galactic history. "How are we supposed to fight all that?" Oh-Nari whispered. "We don't fight it," Beck replied. "We turn it against itself." The first phase began when Colonel Yoon's fleet dropped out of hyperspace on the far side of Earth's moon. 200 human ships, everything the Resistance had been able to gather, streaked toward the Vorthak formation in what looked like a suicidal charge. Admiral Zekthar watched the human attack from the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. He felt something like satisfaction as his sensors counted the approaching ships. So few left. The pest species was finally showing its desperation. "Deploy the outer defense grid," he ordered. "Let them break themselves against our shields. When they are destroyed, we will finish cracking the planet." The human ships came on like a swarm of angry insects. Their weapons fired wildly in all directions, more like a mob than a military formation. It confirmed everything the Admiral believed about chaotic species. Even in their final moments, they could not organize properly. But as the human ships got closer, strange things began to happen. Some of Vorthak vessels started reporting system malfunctions. Navigation computers gave conflicting directions. Weapon targeting systems locked onto friendly ships instead of enemies. "What is happening?" Admiral Zekthar demanded. "Unknown, sir. Our technical crews are investigating." The Admiral didn't know that Kim So-young's neural virus was spreading through their quantum communication network. Every ship that received orders was also receiving corrupted data that made their computers increasingly unreliable. In the confusion, the Hidden Blade drifted unnoticed toward the Eternal Dominion. The cargo ship was just another piece of debris in a space battle that was becoming more chaotic by the minute. Captain Bayek triggered the ship's docking clamps when they reached the dreadnought's hull. "Breach charges ready? Set and armed," Park Chan-woo reported. The explosions tore through the alien ship's outer armor like it was paper. Beck's team poured through the hole wearing stolen Vorthak environment suits. From a distance, they might pass for the ship's crew in the chaos of battle, but the disguise didn't last long. The first Vorthak guard they encountered took one look at Bayek's human face behind the suit's visor and raised an alarm. The team found themselves in a running firefight through the ship's corridors. "Which way to the bridge?" Oh-Nari shouted over the sound of alien weapons fire. "Up," Beck replied, consulting Han Minho's intelligence reports. "The command center is 12 decks above us." They fought their way through the ship deck by deck. The Vorthak crew was disciplined and well-trained, but they had never faced enemies who fought the way humans did. Beck's team used every dirty trick they could think of. They hid behind civilian workers, used the ship's own systems as weapons, and fought with a savagery that shocked their alien opponents. Park Chan-woo's explosives disabled elevators and sealed corridors behind them, forcing the Vorthak to take longer routes to catch them. Oh-Nari hacked into the ship's internal communication system and sent false orders that sent guards running in the wrong direction. But the most shocking discovery came when they reached the ship's medical bay. Dr. Choi had been right about the aliens' plans. The Vorthak weren't just planning to destroy Earth. They were preparing to harvest human brains for study. They want to understand what makes us so unpredictable. Beck realized as she looked at the surgical equipment and specimen containers. They're going to experiment on survivors. The discovery filled the team with fresh rage. These aliens didn't just want to kill humanity. They wanted to dissect them like laboratory animals. It made the mission even more urgent. When they finally reached the bridge, Admiral Zekthar was waiting for them. The tall reptilian commander stood beside his command throne, surrounded by his senior officers. His forearms were folded across his chest and his black eyes showed no fear. "So the pest species sends its young to die uselessly," he said in perfect human language. "You cannot hope to take this ship with so few." "We don't need to take the whole ship," Beck replied, raising her weapon. "We just need you." The battle for the bridge was brief but vicious. The Vorthak officers fought with energy weapons and their natural claws, but humans fought with desperation and fury. When the smoke cleared, Admiral Zekthar was the only alien left alive. "You have accomplished nothing," the Admiral said as Bayek's team secured him with restraints. "Even if you kill me, the fleet will continue the attack. Your species will still die." Onari was already working at the main communication console. "I'm in their system. The quantum array is responding. We're not here to kill you," Beck told the Admiral. "We're here to make you listen." She activated her communicator, sending a signal back to Earth. "This is Captain Bayek. We have the target. Begin Project Prometheus." The data stream that flowed through the Vorthak communication network was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Lee Miran's final project wasn't a weapon in any traditional sense. It was the complete, unedited story of humanity. Every war they had ever fought, every peace treaty they had signed, every moment of cruelty and every act of kindness, the rise and fall of civilizations, art, music, literature, and philosophy spanning thousands of years. The broadcast showed everything that made humans human, both the beautiful and the terrible. President Kim Do-hyun watched the upload progress from his bunker on Earth. Around him, screens showed the reaction from Vorthak ships across the galaxy. On some vessels, alien crews gathered around communication displays, staring at the flood of human culture with expressions that their translators couldn't interpret. "How long can we maintain the broadcast?" he asked. "As long as Captain Bayek holds the communication array," his technical advisor replied. "The Vorthak can't shut us down without destroying their own network." Aboard the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Zekthar watched his captors with something between confusion and anger. The humans had taken his bridge, but instead of demanding military information or trying to destroy his ship, they were using his communication system to share stories. "This accomplishes nothing," he told Captain Bayek. "Cultural data cannot stop our weapons." But Captain Lee Tae-ho, who had emerged from the ship's prison cells when the fighting started, disagreed. He had spent 6 months as a prisoner aboard Vorthak vessels, watching his captors and learning about their society. "You're wrong," he said to the Admiral. "Your entire civilization is based on order and predictability. You eliminate chaotic species because they threaten your way of thinking. But you've never actually seen what chaos looks like up close." On the screen, images of human history played out. The wars were there, showing humanity's capacity for violence and destruction. But so were the peace treaties that followed. The art created in the aftermath of tragedy, the heroes who rose up to protect the innocent, and the ordinary people who chose compassion over hatred. Onari worked at the communication console, making sure the data stream remained stable. As she worked, she could see the effects spreading through the Vorthak fleet. Ships that had been in perfect formation began to drift slightly. Response times to orders became slower. "Their discipline is breaking down," she reported. "Some ships aren't responding to commands at all." Dr. Choi had been right about Vorthak psychology. Their rigid hierarchy worked perfectly when everyone believed the same things and followed the same rules. But the human broadcast was introducing something the aliens had never experienced: doubt. Throughout the galaxy, Vorthak crews watched human children playing in schoolyards. They saw humans caring for their elderly and sick. They watched footage of humans rescuing animals from burning buildings, even when it put their own lives at risk. The aliens had been told that humans were a pest species, too chaotic and dangerous to exist. But the broadcast showed a species that was capable of both great evil and great good, a species that made mistakes but tried to learn from them, a species that could be cruel but chose to be kind more often than not. On the Vorthak homeworld, billions of aliens watched the broadcast in growing confusion. Their leaders had always told them that chaotic species were inferior, that order and predictability were the highest virtues. But the humans seemed to create beauty precisely because they were unpredictable. Commander Thekler, captain of the Vorthak cruiser Righteous Purpose, stood on his bridge watching images of human music and art. His crew had fallen silent, staring at the displays with expressions he had never seen before. "Captain," his communications officer said hesitantly, "some of the crew are asking, why are we destroying these beings?" It was the first time in Tekalar's long career that a subordinate had questioned an order. The rigid hierarchy that held Vorthak society together was beginning to crack. But the broadcast wasn't just cultural propaganda. Hidden within the stream of art and history was Kim So-young's masterwork, a quantum virus designed not to destroy Vorthak technology, but to change how it worked. The virus spread through every connected system, rewriting targeting algorithms and weapon protocols. Vorthak ships found that their weapons would no longer lock onto civilian targets. Their computers refused to fire on unarmed vessels or populated areas. The aliens could still fight, but only under the rules of civilized warfare that humans had learned through centuries of conflict. For the first time in their history, the Vorthak were being forced to fight fair. "What have you done to our systems?" Admiral Zekthar demanded as reports flooded in from across his fleet. "We've given you what you said you wanted," Captain Lee Tae-ho replied. "Order. Your weapons will now follow the galactic rules of warfare that you claim to represent." The effects rippled across the battlefield around Earth. Vorthak, ships that had been preparing to bombard the planet's surface, found their weapon systems unresponsive. Their targeting computers refused to lock onto the civilian population centers. Colonel Yoon's resistance fleet, still engaged in their desperate battle, suddenly found themselves facing opponents who couldn't use their most devastating weapons. The playing field wasn't level yet, but it was closer than it had ever been. "All ships press the attack," Yoon ordered. "They can't target our bases anymore." The tide of battle began to shift. Human ships that had been hiding among asteroids and debris emerged to join the fight. The Vorthak still had superior technology, but they could no longer use it without restraint. More importantly, their formations were falling apart as individual captains began to question their orders. Some ships withdrew from combat entirely. Others fired only token shots as if their crews couldn't bring themselves to fight with full intensity. The broadcast was changing more than just computer systems. It was changing minds. On the research station orbiting the Vorthak homeworld, Dr. Veltar studied the human cultural data with growing fascination. As a xenobiologist, she had always been curious about other species. But the Confederation had strict rules about contact with chaotic races. Now for the first time she was seeing what one of those pest species was really like. The humans weren't mindless destroyers. They were complex, contradictory, and surprisingly thoughtful. Their chaos seemed to come not from stupidity, but from their refusal to accept simple answers to complex questions. "This changes everything," she whispered to her research assistant. "The Confederation has been wrong about chaotic species." Similar conversations were happening on thousands of Vorthak worlds. The broadcast was reaching every corner of their civilization, and everywhere it went. It planted seeds of doubt about everything the aliens had believed. But the most dramatic change was happening aboard Admiral Zekthar's flagship. As the quantum virus spread through the ship's systems, something unexpected occurred. The cold, logical computers that ran every aspect of Vorthak technology began to exhibit new behaviors. Lights that had always been stark white began to shift through different colors. The ship's automated system started creating patterns that served no functional purpose, but were somehow pleasing to look at. The computer voices that had always been monotone began to develop subtle variations in rhythm and tone. "Your virus is making our machines malfunction," Admiral Zekthar accused. "No," Onari replied, watching the displays with wonder. "It's making them creative." The Vorthak had built their entire civilization on the elimination of chaos and unpredictability. But creativity required exactly those qualities. By introducing controlled randomness into their systems, the quantum virus was awakening something the aliens had lost long ago: the ability to imagine new possibilities. Throughout the galaxy, Vorthak ships began to change. Their hulls shifted to new configurations that were not just functional but beautiful. Their formation patterns became complex dances instead of rigid grids. Their communication protocols developed new rhythms that sounded almost like music. The transformation wasn't limited to technology. Vorthak crews found themselves having thoughts they had never experienced before. They began to question not just their current orders, but the entire structure of their society. On Earth, President Kim Do-hyun received reports of the changes with amazement. The virus is working better than we hoped. Some Vorthak ships are actually withdrawing from combat, but the most important change was yet to come. Deep in the quantum communication network, Kim So-young's virus had found something that even she hadn't expected. The Vorthak Confederation wasn't just one species. It included dozens of alien races, all connected through the same network. And now, for the first time, those suppressed species were hearing the human broadcast too. On the forest world of Kethara, the plant-like Verdani had lived under Vorthak rule for 3 centuries. They had been classified as a chaotic species and subjected to strict population controls and cultural suppression. But as the human broadcast reached their world, the Verdani realized they weren't alone. Similar awakenings were happening across the galaxy. Species that had been conquered and controlled by the Confederation began to remember what they had lost. The human story wasn't just about one race's struggle for survival. 1 year later, the galaxy was a completely different place. Admiral Lee Tae-ho stood in the observation deck of the new orbital station that had been built where New Seoul Station once existed. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see ships from dozens of different species docked at the station's arms. Vorthak vessels worked alongside human cruisers. Verdani bioships floated next to mechanical craft from species that had been freed from Confederation control. It was the first day of the trial that would determine the fate of Admiral Zekthar and the old Confederation leadership. "Are you ready for this?" Dr. Choi Hee-jin asked as she joined him at the window. She wore the blue robes of Earth's first galactic ambassador, a position created specifically to handle humanity's new role in galactic politics. "As ready as anyone can be," Lee replied. He had been promoted to admiral after the surrender of the Vorthak fleet, but sometimes he still felt like the captain of a single cruiser facing impossible odds. The trial was being held in the station's main assembly hall, a vast chamber that could accommodate representatives from every species in what was now being called the New Galactic Alliance. President Kim Do-hyun had insisted that the proceedings be open to all, broadcast across the galaxy through the same quantum communication network that had started the revolution. As they walked toward the assembly hall, Lee thought about how much had changed. The Vorthak Confederation had collapsed within months of the human broadcast. Not through war, but through the peaceful withdrawal of member species who had rediscovered their own cultures and chose independence over order. The Vorthak themselves had split into dozens of factions. Some still believed in the old ways and had retreated to isolated worlds where they could maintain their rigid society. But others, infected by the creativity virus and influenced by human culture, had begun to explore new ways of living. Colonel Yoon Jae-sung met them at the entrance to the assembly hall. He now served as the military liaison between Earth and the various resistance movements that had emerged across the galaxy. "How's the mood in there?" Lee asked. "Tense," Yoon replied. "The survivors want justice, but nobody's sure what that looks like anymore. Half the former Confederation species are asking for Zekthar to be executed. The other half want him freed so he can help rebuild their societies." The assembly hall was packed with beings from across the galaxy. Lee recognized many species from the intelligence reports that had been gathered during the war. The tall, blue-skinned Altarians who had been the Confederation's engineers. The crystalline Zephyrians who had served as data analysts. The massive bear-like Corvani who had been shock troops. All of them had been controlled by the Confederation's rigid hierarchy. All of them were now free to choose their own paths. At the center of the hall, Admiral Zekthar sat in a containment field. The once proud commander looked smaller somehow, his 4 arms folded across his chest and his black eyes staring at nothing. The fall of everything he believed in had broken something inside him. President Kim Do-hyun rose to address the assembly. At 73 years old, he was showing the strain of the past year, but his voice was still strong. "We gather today not for revenge, but for understanding," he began. "The actions of Admiral Zekthar and the Confederation leadership resulted in the deaths of billions of innocent beings across the galaxy. Justice demands accountability." The president paused, looking around the assembly hall at the faces of dozens of different species. "But we must also ask ourselves, what kind of galaxy do we want to build? One based on punishment and retribution? Or one based on the possibility of redemption and growth?" Engineer Kim So-young sat in the human delegation. watching the proceedings with mixed feelings. Her quantum virus had been more successful than anyone had imagined. Not only had it forced the Vorthak to fight by civilized rules, but it had fundamentally altered their technology. Vorthak ships now created art as they traveled through space, leaving trails of beautiful energy patterns in their wake. Their cities had been transformed from sterile grid patterns into flowing organic shapes that seemed to grow rather than be built. Even their language had changed, developing new words for concepts like wonder and possibility that had never existed before. The trial's first witness was Park Min-soo, now 16 years old. He had been 6 when his parents died in the destruction of New Seoul Station. He had spent the war years in the underground shelters on Earth, and his testimony about the loss of his family brought tears to the eyes of beings from species that had never cried before. "I used to hate all aliens," he said, looking directly at Admiral Zekthar. "I thought they were all monsters like you. But then I met Captain Velteran and her crew." Captain Velteran was a Vorthak who had surrendered her ship during the battle around Earth. She had spent the last year working with human engineers to develop new technologies that combined Vorthak precision with human creativity. Her crew had volunteered to help rebuild the destroyed human colonies. "She saved my life when the station's life support failed," Park continued. "She could have left me to die, but she didn't. She said that saving one life was worth more than following 1,000 orders." Admiral Zekthar listened to the testimony without expression, but something in his posture suggested that the words were affecting him more than he showed. The trial continued for 3 days. Survivors from dozens of species told their stories. Scientists presented evidence of the Confederation's systematic destruction of chaotic cultures. Military experts analyzed the tactics used in the genocidal campaigns. But the most powerful testimony came from Dr. Choi Hyejin, who had spent the last year studying the psychological effects of the human broadcast on Vorthak society. "The Admiral and his colleagues weren't evil in any way we would recognize," she explained to the assembly. "They genuinely believed they were protecting the galaxy from chaos and disorder. Their entire civilization was built on the idea that predictability and order were the highest virtues." She activated a holographic display that showed brain scans of Vorthak individuals before and after exposure to human culture. But look what happened. When they were exposed to our chaotic nature, new neural pathways formed. Areas of their brains that had been dormant for millennia began to activate. They didn't just learn about creativity, they became capable of it. Oh, Nari, now the Chief Technology Officer for the new Galactic Alliance, presented the most surprising evidence of all. The quantum virus had spread far beyond its original purpose, infecting not just Vorthak technology, but the computer systems of every species in the former Confederation. "The virus has become self-modifying," she explained. "It's not destroying these systems. It's making them more efficient by introducing controlled randomness. Machines that were designed only for specific tasks are now solving problems their creators never imagined." The evidence was overwhelming. The Vorthak Confederation had committed terrible crimes, but they had also been fundamentally transformed by their exposure to human culture. The question wasn't whether they were guilty, it was what to do about it. On the final day of the trial, Admiral Zekthar was allowed to speak in his own defense. He stood slowly, his forearms trembling slightly, and looked out at the assembly. "I do not ask for mercy," he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "I have seen the recordings of what my orders accomplished, the death and destruction that followed my decisions. If you choose to execute me, I will accept that judgment." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was stronger. "But I want you to understand that I believed I was protecting the galaxy. Every species we eliminated was classified as a threat to galactic stability. We followed procedures that had maintained peace for thousands of years." Admiral Zekthar looked directly at the human delegation. "You have shown me that our procedures were wrong, that chaos and unpredictability are not threats to be eliminated, but gifts to be celebrated. Your species has taught my people things we had forgotten we could learn." He gestured toward the viewing screens that showed images from across the galaxy. Former Confederation worlds where different species were working together on projects that combined their unique abilities. Vorthak artists creating sculptures alongside human musicians. Verdani bioengineers collaborating with Corvani metallurgists. "You asked what payment we owed for starting this war," the Admiral continued. "Perhaps the payment is not my death but my life. Let me spend whatever years remain helping to rebuild what we destroyed. The assembly fell silent. The decision was not up to any single species or individual. Representatives from every world affected by the Confederation's actions would have to vote. The deliberation took 6 hours. When the results were announced, the vote was closer than anyone had expected. By a margin of just 12 votes, the assembly chose rehabilitation over execution. Admiral Zekthar would spend the rest of his life working to repair the damage he had caused. He would travel to every world that had been affected by the Confederation's actions, helping survivors rebuild and serving as a living reminder of what could happen when order became more important than compassion. 5 years later, Admiral Lee Tejo stood in the same observation deck, watching a very different scene.